While doing my marketing campaign for Detente for the Ravenous earlier this year, Nathan Lurs of the Reckless Attack podcast graciously granted me an interview. And while I think that interview is one of the best encapsulations of both my personality and what I'm trying to do as a creator, Lurs asked a pretty basic question that sent me down a rabbit hole. When discussing how I got into the hobby, I typically say that a grade school friend introduced me to D&D 3.5, and later, when the McElroys launched their Adventure Zone actual play, I fully dived in. But looking back, across all the games I'd played since I was a kid, I did have a faint memory of a strange Pokémon-themed game I used to beg my dad to play with me. I briefly brought it up to Lurs, and to my surprise, he knew exactly what I was talking about. Later, he followed up with an email and picture of the game I had been describing, 1999's Pokémon Junior Adventure game. I immediately went to eBay and had a copy within days. I eagerly tore into this box, but it soon became apparent why I might have considered this game my first RPG. Because right as the Pokémon wave crashed upon the shores of the United States, a little company named Wizards of the Coast decided to jump in on this trend. And listen, I, as a rule, do not talk about Wizards games on this channel. However, I'm willing to make an exception because nowadays you cannot pay Hasbro for this game even if you wanted to. It's a relic of a brief moment in time, but as I flipped through its short rulebook, I recognized aspects of its kid-centric design that only now can I appreciate in hindsight. The box itself contains few objects. This pamphlet rulebook, the majority of which is a series of short adventures or episodes, a six-sided die, these coins that have Pikachu's face on them, the tail side has his eyes X'd out and his tongue sticking out, which I love, and 26 Pokémon power cards, which are essentially stat blocks for the kinds of Pokémon you can encounter through play. There's also a checklist for every one of the original 151 Pokémon, which suggests the game was intended to have expansions that would allow you to complete the Pokédex, which sadly never materialized. That trail, the suggestion of expansions to come which were suddenly dropped, got me wondering about how this game even came about. To satiate my curiosity, I reached out to its lead designer, Bill Slavicsek. Slavicsek has a frankly staggering number of writing and design credits, on games from the original Star Wars RPGs from West End Games, to both the 3rd and 4th editions of D&D, to his current role as narrative director on The Elder Scrolls Online. As I looked into his design history, it became clear just how much influence Slavicsek had on my early steps into the RPG hobby, and the culture I enjoy at large. Slavicsek graciously agreed to an interview, and his answers about the design and history of Pokémon Junior really helped shape my understanding and appreciation for this weird little artifact of history. I began by asking about how Slavicsek was put on the project, guessing that he was probably not originally a Pokémon fan when it started.
Yeah, so prior to that, I had started at West End Games, went to TSR, and then TSR was purchased by Wizards of the Coast. When that happened, we moved out to Seattle, and I became the director of R&D for role-playing games, Dungeons & Dragons, and all of our ancillary products. So when you asked how did I get put on it, I guess I put myself on it. That was, but it came about because this was before the release of 3rd edition. Right around or before we did 3rd edition, while that was in production, we were starting to think about games for introducing people into the hobby. And one of the games I pitched was a D&D Junior game. The brand team, led by Ryan Dancy, liked that, but thought that it would be better to do it with something a little more mainstream at the time. And we had the Pokemon license for trading cards. And he said, why don't you do it with Pokemon? So I said, okay. First, I have to figure out if I actually know what Pokemon's all about, because I wasn't working on the card game. So we watched. I got all of the videos for the TV series that was on at the time. I watched all of those to immerse myself in the world. Then I grabbed one of my other designers, Stan, Stan or Stan Brown, and we started putting the game together.
The meat of the game is, of course, in its rules. The text is simple and straightforward. You play as 10-year-old Pokemon trainers, setting out on your own for the first time. Your first adventure has you receiving a Pokemon from Professor Oak, doing a quick battle, and continuing on your way. The game's combat system is not especially complex, but I think it's clear that it takes cues from its trad game predecessors. Each Pokemon card has two sides, representing what attacks it can do. Each attack lists a range of numbers which represent that attack's chance to hit. Players take turns selecting an attack, rolling a d6, and if the result falls within the attack's 2-hit range, the attack is successful, and it deals the specified number of hits to the target. It's a basic system, but I think it makes sense. A child doesn't need the abstractions of armor class or mixed successes. It's a much smarter design choice to say, hey, if you roll these numbers here, you do the thing. And that roll-to-hit mechanic is essentially the entirety of the game. The adventures in the text will often put you in the position of crossing a river or putting out a fire, but the core goal will be to have your Pokemon hit enough times, doing enough damage to a particular obstacle, abstracted narratively, to defeat it, similar to running down a segmented clock in Forged in the Dark games. Slavicsek confirms that simplicity was intentional.
So we tried to make sure that it was dirt simple, or as simple as we could make it. We tried to build the rules so that they were easily understandable by the parent who may or may not be a gamer. But at the time, we're also hoping that this is a great game for someone who plays a role-playing game and they've just gotten to that point in their lives where they're starting to have children. So it was we tried to mix it up for that. But in addition to being true to the Pokemon brand and story, we wanted the game to be fun but easy, something that a parent could help tell a story and their kid could get into it.
And I think that makes perfect sense. Lord knows the original Pokemon Game Boy games are solely fixated on turn-based combat, and Pokemon Jr. replicates that concentration by giving players a variety of creatures to battle. This game was trying less to be a novel take on an up-and-coming mega franchise, and more trying to introduce both children and parents to the world of tabletop role-playing. It absolutely employs touchstones from both the Game Boy games and the anime. The vast majority of the encounters are just scenes from the first Pokemon cartoon, but also borrows from RPG module design that was pretty standard for the time. For instance, one of the first adventures in the game, players are encouraged to walk out into the tall grass to start an encounter. Trainers pick a card at random from the deck, and then face off against whichever Pokemon they choose. You can pretty easily make the connection between this and any given RPG's random encounter table. Such procedural elements have been part of the hobby since before I was born. But it's the way Pokemon Jr. implements those elements that truly endears it to me. For instance, this random Pokemon is not using stats comparable to those on the cardboard blocks, but weaker ones from the rulebook. With a 2-hit rate of 5 to 6, which is to say 33% of the time, and with only 6 HP, no matter what Pokemon you choose, you're gonna be at a pretty significant advantage. That's because this game wants you to catch Pokemon. It's not supposed to be a slog, especially when you're only working with your starter monster at this point in the game. You could certainly get unlucky and have some Beedrill wipe the floor with your Pikachu, but mathematically, the game wants you to win.
Yeah, the idea was we wanted a fun experience that wasn't going to be disappointing, or at least not regularly disappointing. So yes, we fudged the numbers to make it as friendly to the kids as we could.
In the next episode, the game has you reenact one of the first scenes of the Pokemon anime, the one in which Ash is nearly murdered by a flock of Spearow. And while I think subjecting a young child to that kind of emotional precarity would be a challenge for a parent new to RPGs, the game gives you read-aloud text. It starts by setting the scene, asking you collaborative questions about what the player and their Pokemon are doing to relax, and then ramps up the intensity. The Spearow appear, scaring the shit out of everyone, and then Officer Jenny conscripts you into the town's defense. Which again, is simple, but gives the parent GM a ton of support. You set the scene, encourage collaborative world building, and then increase the stakes. Pulling in the familiar character of Officer Jenny gives kids a narrative handhold, while also directing them forward in the adventure, something a parent may not feel confident in doing without the book's support. It's railroady, certainly, but again, you gotta assume that the people who are intended to run this booklet are not RPG freaks like us, but people who lived through the Satanic Panic. If they have any thoughts about RPGs at all, they're probably bad ones. And I think it's really smart to ease both player and parent through this process, holding their hands and guiding them into the world of imaginary play. I have a distinct memory of playing this game with my dad. I love my father, but I cannot imagine him being super excited about the narrative conventions of a Japanese cartoon for children that existed to take money from his wallet and convert it into little toys from Burger King. But God bless him, he ran this game for me. And I remember him using the read-aloud text, specifically from episode 5, with a little boy named Bobby who is trying to cross a broken bridge. I remember my dad asking what the little boy looks like in particular, because I know I was like, oh, he's a poor little Victorian orphan, obviously. I don't know why I assumed all little boys were homeless and impoverished when I was 6. Kids are weird. But I do remember that moment, because the game gave both me and my dad the tools to engage with it in that way, and because I'd never had a game ask me those questions, it became a core memory for me 2.5 decades later. This game may seem flimsy by contemporary standards, but it worked, because it provided a level of support for parents trying to, 1, do roleplay for the first time, and 2, get invested in a world that their kid was obsessed with, that they, presumably being born in the 60s or 70s, did not give a shit about. Between the structural scaffolding and the familiar, player-friendly mechanical design, Pokémon Junior Adventure is an extremely kind game. It's heavily weighted toward players because, of course, kids don't want to deal with swingy 2-hit rolls or see their beloved Pokémon get rocked by random chance. It's got straightforward, easy-to-use adventure structures that rarely run over a page, both for a child's attention span, as well as for parents who are unfamiliar with running RPG modules, but are probably pretty familiar with reading their kid a bedtime story. In fact, Slavicsek confirmed this was considered in the game's design.
We tried to get the sense of, just like you would read with your kid, now you're reading with your kid, but you're also letting the kid interact with that reading. That was the hope.
It's built from head to toe to be easy to play and run, with the purpose of bringing parents and kids together to tell a collaborative story. And that's extremely sweet. With such an intentional and kid-friendly format, I wanted to see if Slavicsek had any insight into how the game was received, and why any potential expansions were never released.
A couple of things, a lot of it's anecdotal, but at the time it was one of the best-selling role-playing games we'd ever produced, which was great. Unfortunately, the brand team saw dollar signs and we overprinted a reprint, and so it did really well, and then it didn't do quite as well, right? We oversaturated after a while, but that said, it was still a success. So I'm proud of what we did. We actually had 3 more. We were going to do 3 more, and we had them in production. But again, instead of going to the next one, we reprinted the first one, and we messed up the marketplace. So live and learn.
An unflattering, but perhaps unsurprising end to the project. But even though this game didn't stand the test of time, it's persisted in my memory, some 25 years after its debut. And I'm not sure if anyone could ask for a better outcome from a creative project than to be inspiring people to make new things literally decades later. When asked about his career and thoughts on his lasting legacy, Slavicsek had this to say.
Oh, of course. I mean, we do these things, A, because we love it, and B, because we want other people to love it too. So I was very much into how do we teach people, how do we bring people into the hobby? But, with every project I work on, I find the thing about it that I'm gonna love so that I can put that into the product and hopefully it translates. So I found the sweet spot, what resonated with me, and I tried to get that into the game as I wrote and designed it. And I do that with everything. And I hope when people look back, they see, whether they know I did it or not, it's up on their shelf. They take it down every once in a while and they play it, and that'll be a great legacy.
Thank you to everybody for watching. I really appreciate anyone who takes the time to see what I'm saying about tabletop games. I especially want to thank Bill Slavicsek for being so generous with his time and experience. It was genuinely delightful to speak with somebody who so deeply impacted my understanding of culture and games. If you want to help me keep the channel going, you can send me a tip at my Ko-Fi in the video description. My background picture is Liquefied Image by Adrian on Unsplash, and my profile picture is by Eater Outsider on Tumblr. If you want to find more of my work, I'm at aavoit on Blue Sky, Monster Factory Fanfic on Tumblr, but my main site is aavoit.com, where I talk about games and writing. I also do a podcast, Mortified the Friendship Quest, where me and my friend Leyla do critical media analysis. We just finished up our end of the year episode with a chat about Hot Frosty, which was actually very good. I don't know who these people are who are dunking on it, but that movie ripped. This is my last video of the year. I'll be taking a break, and we'll hopefully see you sometime in January. If you have suggestions for games I should check out, please drop them in the comments. Otherwise, have a good holiday season and a happy new year.